Jeffrey Epstein is dead, but his ghost is doing more damage to the powerful than he ever could have done alive. Because right now, in Washington, a congressional committee is pulling some of the most recognizable names in American political history into closed-door depositions and demanding answers about their connections to a man who ran the most well-documented, most well-protected sex trafficking operation in modern American history. And the names being called into that room are not obscure. They are not minor figures. They are people who have shaped the last 3 decades of American life. And the fact that they are being called in at all tells you everything about how deep this rabbit hole actually goes. Hillary Clinton was deposed. The former First Lady of the United States, the former senator from New York, the former Secretary of State, the woman who came within a few thousand votes in 3 states of becoming the most powerful person on earth, she was compelled to sit before the House Oversight Committee and answer questions about Jeffrey Epstein. And before they could ask her a single question, she made something absolutely clear. She said that if this committee was genuinely serious about uncovering the truth about Epstein's trafficking crimes, it would not be wasting its time questioning her. It would be calling in Donald Trump. It would be putting the current president of the United States under oath and asking him to explain why his name appears in the Epstein files tens of thousands of times. Tens of thousands. That is not a rounding error. That is not a peripheral mention. That is a number that demands explanation, and Hillary Clinton said it on the record in an official congressional proceeding before anyone had asked her anything. She went further. She called what is currently happening a cover-up, not an investigation that is moving slowly, not a process that has bureaucratic inefficiencies, a cover-up. She said the Trump administration is actively redacting names from the Epstein files, protecting people whose identities should be made public. She said they are stonewalling legitimate requests from members of Congress who are trying to do their jobs. And she said the reason she was sitting in that room instead of the people who actually needed to answer these questions was purely and simply political diversion. They pulled her in, she argued, to pull the camera away from Trump, to make the story about the Clintons instead of about the man currently running the country whose connections to Epstein are, by her account, far more extensive and far more troubling than anything in her own history. Now, here is where it gets complicated, because Hillary Clinton is not wrong that she has no direct connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Every Democratic member of the committee who came out to speak to reporters said the same thing, that Clinton had never met Epstein, that she had no firsthand knowledge of his crimes, that compelling her testimony was producing nothing useful for the investigation. When asked inside the deposition room whether she had spoken with people connected to Epstein's estate, including the co-executors of his will, she said no. When asked about names associated with Epstein's inner circle, she reportedly said she wasn't even familiar with some of the people being mentioned. By every indication coming out of that room, Hillary Clinton had no meaningful connection to Jeffrey Epstein's operation. But, and this is the but that changes everything, Bill Clinton did. And that is the entire reason she was there. Her husband, the 42nd President of the United States, has a documented, established, undeniable relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. He flew on Epstein's private jet. He appears in the Epstein files repeatedly. Jeffrey Epstein visited the Clinton White House 17 times. 17. Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman who has since been convicted of sex trafficking, the woman who was Epstein's primary enabler and recruiter of victims, attended Chelsea Clinton's wedding. These are not allegations. These are documented facts. And they mean that Bill Clinton has serious questions to answer. But Bill Clinton was not being deposed that day. Hillary was. And that distinction matters enormously, because it reveals the precise nature of what Republicans on this committee were actually doing. They were not pursuing the evidence, they were performing. They were generating headlines. They were creating a spectacle around a woman whose only connection to this entire nightmare is that she married a man who made deeply troubling choices decades ago. Once again, in her political life, Hillary Clinton was being summoned to answer for Bill. Once again, she was the one sitting in the room while the questions were really about someone else. The analysts covering this story captured it perfectly. This was her latest Stand By Your Man moment, and it was one she had absolutely no choice but to endure. The Republican members asked her about Bill's behavior. They asked her about his relationship with Epstein. They asked her personal, pointed, deliberately uncomfortable questions designed not to advance any investigation, but to put her in an impossible position in public, or as public as a closed-door deposition can be. Her response to questions about her personal feelings regarding her husband's conduct was that she was not there to discuss her feelings. That answer is worth thinking about for a moment. It is the answer of someone who has been through this before, who knows exactly what is being attempted, and who refuses to give her interrogators the emotional response they are fishing for. She has had decades of practice. She did not crack. But here is what the Democrats on that committee were saying loudly and clearly, and it is a point that cannot be dismissed with partisan wave of the hand. If the standard for compelling testimony before this committee is having some connection, any connection, however indirect, to someone who appears in the Epstein files, then the witness list should look radically different from what it currently looks like. Howard Lutnick, for example. Lutnick publicly claimed he had cut off his ties to Epstein. That claim was subsequently found to be false. He visited Epstein's island in 2012, years after he said the relationship was over. By any consistent standard of investigative logic, he should be sitting in that deposition room answering questions under oath. He is not. And the reason he is not because his connection to Epstein is less significant than Hillary Clinton's. It is because he is politically aligned with the current administration, and the Clintons are not. Melania Trump actually knew Jeffrey Epstein. There are photographs. They moved in the same social circles in New York. If the committee's stated logic is that proximity to Epstein justifies a deposition, then that logic applies to her as well. She has not been called. She will not be called. And that selective application of investigative standards tells you everything you need to know about whether this is a genuine pursuit of justice or a political operation dressed up in the language of accountability. And then there is the largest, most unavoidable fact sitting at the center of all of this. Donald Trump's name appears in the Epstein files tens of thousands of times. Trump and Epstein were social acquaintances for years. They moved in the same New York elite circles. Trump once said publicly that Epstein was a terrific guy who liked beautiful women as much as he did. And now Trump's administration is the one controlling which names in the Epstein files get released to the public and which names get redacted. The administration is the gatekeeper of its own exposure. The people with the most to lose from full transparency are the people deciding how much transparency there will be. Hillary Clinton said this was a cover-up, and when you lay out those facts in sequence, it is genuinely difficult to construct an alternative explanation that is more convincing. The Democratic members of the committee have been clear. They want Trump deposed. They want him under oath. They want him asked directly on the record to explain his connections to Epstein in detail. That is not going to happen while Republicans control the committee. But Democrats have made the political calculation that even if they cannot force that deposition today, they can make the asymmetry of this investigation so visible and so undeniable that the public cannot ignore it. Every time a Republican asks Hillary Clinton a question about her husband while refusing to ask Trump about his own Epstein connections, Democrats see an opportunity to highlight that contradiction. Now, The next day's testimony. Bill Clinton. This is where the stakes go from high to historically unprecedented. A former president of the United States has never been compelled against his will to testify before Congress. Never. Not in the entire history of the Republic. What was going to happen when Bill Clinton sat in that room was going to be, regardless of what he said or did not say, a moment that American political and legal history would be analyzing for a very long time. Because unlike his wife, he cannot credibly claim no connection. Unlike his wife, he cannot sit there and say he does not recognize the names being mentioned. He flew on the plane. He was in the files. Epstein was in his White House 17 times. Ghislaine Maxwell was at his daughter's wedding. These facts exist. They are documented. They are not going away. The question that hung over everything, over the deposition, over the parking lot reporters, over the entire spectacle of that day, was whether any of this was actually going to produce justice for Epstein's victims. The women and girls who were trafficked and abused, who spent years trying to be believed, who watched their abuser die in a jail cell before a full accounting could be made, they were the reason this investigation was supposed to exist. They were the reason any of this mattered. And what they deserved was an investigation that followed the evidence wherever it led, that did not protect the powerful based on their political connections, that did not redact names to shield people who needed to be exposed, that did not use their suffering as ammunition in a partisan battle. While the people most responsible for enabling Epstein's crimes continued to live comfortably and freely. Whether this committee was capable of delivering that kind of investigation was, based on everything that happened that day, an open and deeply troubling question. The Democrats said nothing useful came from Hillary's testimony. The Republicans asked questions about feelings and personal marriage dynamics. The investigation into one of the most serious criminal enterprises in modern American history was, at least on this day, producing more political theater than actual accountability. But tomorrow was coming. Bill Clinton was coming. And whatever happened when a former president sat down under oath and was forced to account for a relationship that has never been adequately explained, that was going to be something that no amount of political maneuvering could fully contain. The facts were the facts. The files were the files. The flights were the flights. And the committee, for all its partisan games, was about to find itself in a room with a man who had real answers to give, whether he wanted to give them or not. That was the story. Not the theater of today. Not the political posturing. Not the questions about feelings that were designed to wound rather than illuminate. The story was what was coming next. A former president. A closed room. A set of questions that the most powerful people in America had been trying to avoid for years, and a historical moment that nobody who cared about accountability and justice could afford to look away from.